This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. This is Rob Port. We're having a debate in the legislature about something that, well, it affects a lot of you. If you're using apps these days, and honestly, who isn't, whether it's on your smartphone or maybe an iPad or something like that, a lot of times what'll happen is you'll subscribe to a service. Maybe it's like a fitness app. Maybe you're subscribing to a publication, and that subscription will go through payment services that are run by Apple or Google, right? Because those are the two big. You're either sort of an Android user or you're an Apple user, and if you're using these apps, that's probably where you got them. They have a near monopoly on this marketplace, and so because of that, they also have a near monopoly on all the transactions that take place on the apps that are sold or just downloaded through their stores. So there's a bill before the North Dakota legislature. It is Senate Bill 2333. It is introduced by Kyle Davison, Senator Kyle Davison, a Republican from Fargo. And it would supporters say it would level the playing field. So here to talk to me about that is Lacey Anderson. She is with a group called the Coalition for App Fairness, as well as Mark Busey, who is the head of global policy for Match.com. Mark, Lacey, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you much.
Thanks, Rob. Lacey, let's talk about this bill specifically. Why is this needed?
Well, first of all, Rob, I think what's important to recognize is here in North Dakota, we have a pretty tremendous tech industry given the size of our state. And we have a number of app developers, Fargo, Grand Forks. We have big, tech groups in both of those cities that are suffering from this tax, I guess you could call it, that Apple imposes on a daily basis. And so TechND is supporting this. Their members are supportive of trying to find a way to help out these smaller app developers be able to operate on these systems.
What is the tax specifically? Because I think for a lot of us, we get an app and then, there might be a purchase within the app, and it's like $3 or something to subscribe or $3 to buy some coins or something for a game you're playing. And a lot of us don't really think about where that money goes. So what exactly are you talking about this tax?
Sure. So when you have an app on your phone that you've downloaded, whether it's free or you paid for it, there's transactions that occur within that app. Like you mentioned, a subscription, a game, if you want to upgrade to a fee for the app that you have to get more products. And anytime you do that, spend any money on a digital app, an app that is purely in digital form on your phone, Apple will charge 30% of everything that you spend. They take 30% of that, give the other 70% back to the developer. And that is considered their fee for allowing them to just be on the platform, essentially. And in addition to the fact that they pay a fee every year anyway to be there.
Now you're mentioning Apple, but Google's also a part of this. Does Google do the same thing?
Absolutely. It's exactly the same. Same fees.
Okay. So it's Apple and Google, and there's basically a 30% charge. Now, what does this bill do to address that?
So in this bill, what we're asking for, and I want to clarify, not every app is that way. 84% of the apps are ones where you're getting a product. So Uber, if you're ordering on Amazon, physical product, they don't apply this fee.
Okay. So if I order a pizza through an app, 30% of the pizza charge is not going to Apple. Is that correct? Okay. And so if I'm getting a physical product, like I order something from Amazon or something, that's not, but it's something where if I'm paying like a subscription, like if I pay a subscription for a workout app or something to get their videos or something, that's where Apple's taking the money.
Correct.
Okay. So
I want to clarify that first.
Okay.
So the way they do that is they require you to use Apple Pay or Google Pay. You can't pay through any other method. You have to set that up on your phone. And then when you subscribe for Peloton, say, or Spotify or any of these digital apps, you're required to run all of that through Apple themselves. So it goes through Apple Pay or it goes through Google Pay. You don't have a choice to pay with a credit card or PayPal or whoever. There's a million different ways, right? So what this bill would do is it would require Apple and Google to allow those 15% of those other apps to have multiple payment options, just like Uber does, just like the other apps do, so that they are no longer required to give that 30% to Apple. Consumers have a choice how to pay, and app developers have options for not having to have 30% of their revenue taken.
So what's the argument? I mean, if we're talking about a platform that Apple or Google, as the case may be, built and maintained, it's their garden, right? I mean, that's sort of the term, I guess, that I think about are these sort of walled gardens. I mean, they're obviously doing it for a reason. They build these walled gardens because they want to keep you within the Google ecosystem or keep you within the Apple ecosystem. But at the end of the day, playing devil's advocate here, these are platforms that they built and platforms that they maintained. Why shouldn't they be allowed to charge this fee?
I'll let Mark kind of talk on that.
Sure.
I think he has some good background.
Yeah, hey, thank you so much. And appreciate the conversation because it's really needed. Nobody's trying to deny Apple or Google the right to collect fees for the platform that they built. They put in, equity and technology into this, and they both have very good stores. So that's not the issue. The issue is that all the apps developers should be treated the same, should have the same opportunities. So to pay for these apps, everybody from Uber to Airbnb to the exercise app, downward yoga right now is really popular in these sorts of apps because of COVID. Everybody should be treated the same. And therefore, it would be an even playing field.
Well, so explain to me, how are they not? Because we drew a distinction. There's if I'm buying a pizza or I'm buying some physical product that's going to get shipped to my house, they're not charging 30% on that. But if I'm buying a subscription or something, they're charging on that. Is there another way that they're not treating app developers equally?
That's the primary one. It's determined arbitrarily, entirely inside a black box at Apple and Google. And the rest of us just have to watch and listen. This is determined by, they own a monopoly. And when you have a monopoly, you have certain abilities to make unilateral decisions like this. So, this is decided by them, unfortunately.
But Rob, I think you also can see, like with the parlor example, it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're discriminating based on fees. They can shut down anyone they want.
Sure.
Whether we're not getting into whether that was justified or the politics of it. The point being, they can just decide we don't like you, and you can't be on here. And we saw that a little bit with Epic and the Fortnite issue. Is Epic tried to have their own way of paying for upgrades in the game, etc. And Apple said, no, you don't get to, and blocked them from their app store. So I think what's scary is thinking long term what they can do with this power. And if we don't start saying something that we and the small guys here, people on this service, we have to start speaking up because long term implications are pretty scary.
So Mark, maybe you can, asking this question of you, how long have Apple and Google been doing this? Is this a new policy or has this been kind of the status quo since these platforms launched?
It wasn't, when they very first created the App Store, it was not the case. But Steve Jobs, in some emails that were later released in court, decided that they should try to make the arrangement, to use their terms, as sticky as possible. i.e. to keep developers and users locked into the system. And they made that decision when Kindle and ebooks showed up on the scene. They wanted to make sure that iPhone users weren't swapping out and going to use Kindle. So it's been around like this for about 9-10 years now.
And I think Mark touches on one other point, too, to your previous question. Another thing they're doing that's anti-competitive is they have all the data, right? So they're collecting data from when I, say, use my Peloton app, when I listen to Spotify. Oh, these are really popular. This works, this doesn't. Here's services they like, upgrades they like, etc. And then they create a competing product, and they make it function better on the phone than the other products, essentially sometimes booting other apps even from the platform because no one's buying them anymore.
Yeah, Apple, they got into the fitness business recently. They got into the music business before. They just keep entering books. They enter the business, and because they know all the best customers and all their spending habits, they have an instant leg up to jump in and compete.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I work in the news media, and so one of our things that we're struggling with is obviously historically our medium has been reliant on ad revenue. In the internet age, that has been a struggle for us, so we are moving back towards, specifically the company that I work for is moving back towards a subscription model where we want people to buy subscriptions. I'm not at the level of this is all above my pay grade. I don't get to make these decisions, but I imagine my company would like to sell subscriptions through, like, it'd be very nice if somebody could download our app and then just subscribe right through it. But I don't think that we could afford with our profit. And again, I don't know this. I don't see the books or anything, but I can only imagine that we couldn't afford a 30% premium on top of it. So I understand it. It's tough. Lacey, it seems like we've considered, I don't want to say bills like this, but bills that sort of deal with the sort of commerce that goes well beyond North Dakota's borders. I mean, we're talking about app stores that serve billions of customers around the world. How in the world can North Dakota tackle that?
Sure. Well, just like we regulate and deal with any other big business in our state, it's regulated at our border based on people living here. So it could create actually a really great marketplace for app developers to want to move to North Dakota. If they develop their app here, their business is tied here, they're given that benefit of this bill, if it passed, that their users may choose different payment options. Similarly, if you're a resident here in North Dakota, based on the billing address on your phone, you would have that same opportunity. If I go into Peloton and I want to pay with PayPal, now I can, if that's my preferred method of payment. So it's really not that hard. We've enforced much more difficult regulations before, and it's something they already can do on the phone. They're already allowing those other apps to use third-party payment systems. So this isn't like we're inventing the wheel here.
Sure. Is there a risk? I mean, because North Dakota, again, has got to be a very tiny, as much as I love our state, we've got to be a pretty tiny slice of the market that these companies are serving. Is there a risk that if we do this, that Apple and Google just cut us off? They don't have to let us use their app store.
Well, I think that's a pretty risky move because it sets some pretty dangerous precedent.
Sure.
The implications that would give around the world. And listen, this isn't just us starting this argument. Okay, this started a year or more ago. You've got Australia suing Google, the Netherlands, the EU looking into this. Congress already declared last fall that they're a monopoly. There's 5 or 6 other states with this legislation. It's not going away. So we have to keep pushing to try to effectuate change at some level, and they're going to have to respond eventually. So
Mark,
I think North Dakota can be a leader in this.
Sure. Mark, why is Match.com involved in this? I mean, obviously you don't want to pay the fee anymore, but give us a down low on your company's specific experience with this.
Yeah, well, this really impacts our ability to work directly with our consumers. And that's the real problem. We want to give our consumers choices and ways to pay. Because some people, some of our people who use our products, they want to pay every other week, or they want to use miles to pay, airline miles to pay, or a variety of ways. And we don't have that ability because technically Apple disintermediates between us and the consumer. So the consumer actually has a contract with Apple or Google, not with us. And it makes it hard for us to give them creative ways to pay. But also on the backside of this, when a user wants to cancel a subscription, the consumer thinks they have a subscription with us, so they email or they text us or they call us and they say, "Hey, look, I met the love of my life and I want to cancel my subscription now." And we unfortunately have to tell them, we can't do that. You have to call Apple and they'll do it. And that's really rough on consumers. They're busy. Life is lots of stuff being thrown at them in life. They don't necessarily have the time, nor should they have the understanding of I have to call Apple and deal with them and their rules when I subscribed to Match. It just doesn't make any sense to consumers. So that's how we face this and deal with it every single day.
How does it, and just for I'm trying to think of some of the services that I use. I signed up for Spotify. I've never used Match, but I have signed up for Spotify. And I did it through, it just so happens I did it through the Spotify website. I didn't do it through the app. Once I was signed up on the website, then I downloaded the app, if I'm remembering right. I downloaded the app, and I'm pretty sure my billing goes directly to Spotify. If I'm doing it that way, I don't want to get very specific to Spotify, but I mean, for instance, if I signed up to Match, if I went to Match.com, and I signed up for an account, and I signed up for the subscription or whatever it is, and I gave you guys my credit card number, and you're billing me and all that, and then I download your app and use it, is that 30% still taken out, or how does that work?
It isn't, and we would love for users to use the website more, but there's a couple of differences that it's really important to understand. Websites are not able to offer the functionality that apps are.
Right.
They just aren't. So, if you download weather, for example, on your app, it's really important to know the weather exactly where you are. If there's a storm coming your way, or if traffic is an issue and you have that. If you use the app, you don't have the ability to exactly geolocate. You don't have, in the case of Match, you can't swipe on an app. And so you can't swipe on the web where you can on the app, and that's a big difference. It
is. I understand apps obviously work different than websites, but if I subscribe first on the website and then use the login credentials I generated there on the app, is that 30% still going to Google or Apple?
No. So actually, in that case, it isn't. Okay. But the problem is that, one, we can't even tell you to go to our website if on the app. So if you get on the search and you search for, I want a dating product or a music product or a game, we're not even allowed to tell you that you can get it cheaper if you go to our website. They won't let us. It's called the anti-steering provisions that say we can't even tell users about that.
Right. So you can't be like, hey, to sign up, go to our website first and then come back here and log in to get around that. Obviously, Apple and Google don't want you getting around that fee. And let's face it, most people are engaging with online content through apps these days, or on their phones or on their tablets. I've been writing online I'm in my 18th year now, and I can tell you that shift has been dramatic, and it's long-standing now. It's not a new thing anymore.
Well, and as Apple likes to say in their advertising, there's an app for that. It's part of what both Apple and Google want is much more of this all focused into apps. The app ecosystem is where their businesses are going, and it also leaves them at the top of the funnel, to use sort of an industry term. But as Lacey had mentioned earlier, what it means is they are going to be the companies that control all the data. And, if you're going to use a dating product, do you really want Google to know all of your information, who you're looking at and who you're interested in? I think users probably want Match to know it because Match is the service they're buying, not Google, not Apple.
Well, the idea that we're hiding things from Google these days is, as we're sitting here, I'm looking over at the Google speaker that's sitting on my desk, so they know everything already. But point well made. I don't mean to dispute the point. Let's go back. We've talked about the general issue. Let's go back and talk about Senate Bill 2333 specifically, Senator Davison's bill. You're making some pretty bold claims in the press release, Lacey, that we're going to bring additional revenue into the state. $7 million in annual savings for North Dakota consumers, $1.8 billion in annual savings for relocated developers, $30 million in annual increase in state corporate tax collections. Tell us about those numbers.
Sure. Well, that's actually a published economic impact study that was done looking at all kinds of numbers. I mean, it's a pretty long study, and I can send you to the link for that. Really analyzing, okay, how much consumers are spending here on average, taking out that 30%. And there's a lot more that went into it than just these basic numbers and assumptions. And then, assuming so many companies that would bring their business here to save 30% tax, essentially, based on the number that are out there in our population, et cetera. So there's a lot of different factors that went into that, but it is a published study you can look at. But I've talked to companies that I've worked with on this that have said they absolutely will move an office here if this passes. No question.
Rob, I'll tell you right now, Match would love to have people on the ground here. We're a Texas-based company, so we're not part of that California clique, and we're proudly Texas-based. North Dakota would fit right in with what we do in Texas, and we'd love to put some people up here.
Well, I think we'd love to have them. Have any other states done this yet, or would we be the first?
No other states have passed it yet. It is in 5 or 6 other states introduced legislation, okay. So it's moving through in those states. First, I guess, would just be whoever passes it first. So I don't know that it would be North Dakota.
Yeah. Well, we're going to know one way or the other probably by May. But in our state, but you're envisioning if this passed, apps would say, app developers would say, okay, well, if I base myself in North Dakota, I'm going to save 30%. I mean, because let's face it, if you're an app developer, there's really only 2 marketplaces, and probably most of them are operating in both. It's Apple and Google. They're both doing the same thing. So they're thinking, well, that's 30% of my overhead just gone. I could price my product cheaper. It's if I base in North Dakota. So you're saying that would draw a lot of people to North Dakota.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Now, tell us about the progress of the bill. Where does it stand right now, Lacey, in the legislature? I think you were saying there was some talk of amendments or what have you. Where are we at?
So the bill will be on the floor on Monday.
Okay.
We're working with TechND. We want it in the best version possible. But it will be up on the floor on Monday. So we've just really been trying to reach out to constituents, especially, I think, in the Valley, who understand directly how this will impact their business, to reach out to their legislators. It's a complicated issue, and you can't learn all of this in, a 45-minute hearing, especially when it's a lot of individuals that have no experience with technology or even in-purchase, apps or anything like that. So we understand that there is a learning curve to this, and what we're hoping is that those who don't understand it will trust those that do, that TechND pushing this, that the businesses that do this pushing it, constituents that are in a certain age group that use these on a daily basis will reach out to legislators and say, hey, look, this is a problem, and this is a solution, and we'd like you to keep the discussion moving forward because the problem's not going away. I mean,
you're right. I mean, maybe people don't think about the background, but almost everybody's using apps these days. Everybody's got smartphones. Everybody downloads them, whether they're playing Candy Crush or they're on Match. They have the Match app, or they're reading the Inforum, my company's app. Whatever it is, I mean, they're familiar with it, and they're familiar with. I mean, I think a lot of people understand that. I think maybe they just don't necessarily understand some of the economics that are behind it. So maybe hopefully this will open some people's eyes. One question, maybe this is best for you, Mark. What's the potential let's say North Dakota does this and it becomes the thing, and maybe other states follow suit, and Apple and Google aren't going to charge these fees anymore. Typically, when that happens, they make it up somewhere. I mean, couldn't you make that argument? Well, if they're not going to collect these fees, they'll get their money in another way.
Look, they have the right to price their products, and we're not trying to stop that. Would they maybe make the $99 a year payment that everybody pays to be in the App Store $199? They might. But I know from the developer community, they would love to know there's a fixed price. We're just gonna build into our model that we're gonna spend $200 a year to be in the store, or $500 a year to be in the store. But it's that 30% off, 30% take or tax that kills you. If you're a small developer and you have 5 people, 30% is your 6th or 7th employee, or better health insurance, or better benefits. So it really can be done simply. Just make everybody who's in the App Store pay a fee for distribution. Everybody, there really isn't much difference between Uber and Match or Spotify or Epic or Basecamp, which is an email product, or Tile, which is a device to help you find your phones when you lose it. All of these things are similar, right? They're all just new inventions, new ways to use the internet, but they should all be treated the same, given the same opportunities to work with their customers, because then we'll do what the customers want.
Lacey, when hearing Mark say that, it's interesting. It's not really, and maybe you can tell me if this is an apt comparison or not, but it's, in my mind, it's almost sort of comparable to something we've done like with railroads, where we've said, hey, you can't necessarily discriminate. I mean, railroads, now that you've used the condemnation process to build your tracks and your interstate commerce and all these other things, you can't, beyond a certain degree, you can't necessarily discriminate when it comes to what sorts of cargoes you're going to carry, right? So we have to, and it was an issue that came up not that long ago before we had, some of the pipeline capacity that we had today. A lot of North Dakota's oil, maybe most of it at one point, was leaving the state on rail. And that was creating problems for the farmers who, obviously wanted to put their crops on rails too and get them to market. So, I mean, there are regulations in place where we've said, hey, I think they call them common carrier, and I'm a little bit, because I'm maybe not as familiar as these as I should be, but it's really that sort of an argument, right? Like this is like an infrastructure that you've built, and so we want you to just treat everybody who's going to come on this infrastructure the same. Is that the argument that's being made? Is that apt?
Absolutely. I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because I used that in my testimony. If you look back,
great minds think alike, I think.
Exactly. If you look back to the railroad monopolies of the 1870s, this is exactly the same thing. It's just the technology railroad of today, right? There was one form to transport goods and information, and the railroad was the only way to do it through much of the Midwest. And what they imposed were very high fees and restrictions on farmers, and they suffered, and they couldn't afford to put their crops on the rails or get their product out there, because the railroad just stopped them, wouldn't allow them, either through some type of regulation that was discriminatory or through price gouging. And what happened is a number of Midwestern states started passing laws stopping them from doing that. And that's what finally effectuated change, which led to the Interstate Commerce Commission, which led to the Sherman Act, which is the basis for all our antitrust laws today. So I think, 150 years later, this is the railroad. This is exactly what we're dealing with. There's one route, and they're imposing astronomical fees that are preventing business from getting their goods to the market.
I'm a free market guy, but I also do not want to get to a point where, and I don't think free markets are served well. I don't think consumers are served well, where we have, one or maybe just a handful of companies that cultivate walled gardens and limit access, and they're basically in charge of who gets access and who doesn't, who lives, who dies, if I can use that term in terms of some of these marketplaces. That's not how it should be, and I honestly think it may be time for this sort of legislation. Looking forward to seeing how the debate plays out. And Mark and Lacey, thanks for your time.
Thank you much for your time. It's an important issue.
Thanks, Rob.